Well, welcome back, everybody. We now have a very nice couple of sessions, and then again, as I mentioned, a panel session. I can see our speakers are there already, Imogen and Daniel. So first up is Imogen. Imogen Pierce is Head of City Engagement and Integration at Arrival, a fascinating company. I've had the opportunity to visit the facility here in the UK, in Banbury, a while ago. Unfortunately, I couldn't write about it or put anything up on LinkedIn about it because it's all very top secret. But they're absolutely not in stealth mode now. And as Imogen is going to share with us, there's a lot going on. So there was some very exciting news yesterday with a wonderful video from an announcement in the USA, where the company is now engaged with their first micro factory. And I'm sure Imogen's going to talk a bit about that. But it's a lot more than just, oh, here's another EV company. What are they up to? They're a bit more than that. And I'm very pleased to see that. And certainly the video yesterday, little plug for LinkedIn, by the way, I put that up on my LinkedIn channel. It's all about people. It's all about the city and how it works. It's all about liberating mobility for people. So it's not just about flashy, wealthy people and shiny electric cars. And I think that's very much a narrative that I'm keen on myself. So without any further ado, I never know what really ado means, but I think it's prattling on, which I do a lot of. I'd like to welcome Imogen to the stage. I'd like to say, please join us and tell us about what you're up to and why you're keen on this wonderful work that Camden Clean Air Initiative do, because I think it is wonderful work. So Imogen, the stage is yours.
Hello, and thank you so much, Roger, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak today as well. The video that you mentioned is absolutely correct. I watched it yesterday, and to be honest, it does a far better job at explaining what we're trying to do here at Arrival than this presentation that I'm about to share with you, but hopefully I can keep you as engaged. I'm just going to share my screen. I've had a bit of trouble with Keynote this morning, so fingers crossed it's okay.
I'll let you know when it pops up. Oh, there you are. We've got it. That's all good.
And is presentation mode okay as well?
Yeah, perfect.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview and introduction to Arrival, and tell you a bit about how we're sort of creating our brand new electric vehicles, and then start to delve into what we're doing beyond just manufacturing electric vehicles and starting to think more about not just sustainability, but resiliency as well. So founded in 2015, we've been operating in stealth mode until January last year. And during that time, we've now grown to over 1,500 people. And since our sort of inception, we've really been focusing on what can we do to make electric vehicles suitable for the world today, if we're able to design them completely from the ground up. And really that's culminated in these beautiful vehicles that you see there on the right-hand side. And also a unit economics that means that we can start to be really price competitive with fossil fuel equivalents, which, as we know, is a major barrier to electric vehicle adoption. Additionally, it's also meant that we have this very flexible modular design, which means we can manufacture in microfactories. We've also attracted a number of interest and orders from some big globally renowned players such as UPS, Hyundai, Kia, and also backing from BlackRock as well. So as you might have been able to tell from that image, the previous image, we've been focusing largely on commercial vehicles. So that means buses and vans. And as we know, with newer technologies, they normally tend to start in the luxury segment, and that technology starts to trickle down to the commercial segment. However, we know that this is an absolutely enormous and growing market segment, partly down to sort of the rise of e-commerce and next day delivery for ASOS, but also just that the types of industries mean that commercial vehicles are a growing segment. And for us, they are also super interesting because they have very well understood fleet and sort of vehicle usage patterns that we can really start to understand things, for example, like range anxiety. And additionally, if we can sort of electrify vehicles that people interact with on a daily basis, from buses and vans, then it means that we can start to deliver clean technology to more people more quickly. So we're currently at pre-production mode with our bus coming out early next year, and our van shortly afterwards in late 2022 and early 2023. So this is a really, really exciting time for us. We've been in R&D mode, and we're really starting to sort of transition out of that phase and become a very serious player on the global stage. This is our van, which you may have seen in various sort of news announcements. And you can see that it's very different from what you might expect from a traditional sort of Ford Transit van. And this is because we've designed completely around the drivers. They've been very, very integral to the design process. And really we've had to think, well, this doesn't just need to function as a vehicle, but it's also somebody's place of work. And therefore, if you're spending 8 to 10 hours a day in this vehicle, it really needs to function as seamlessly and smoothly as possible. And our bus, I never really thought I could be excited about a bus, but honestly, it really is a beautiful piece of engineering and has been designed with completely the same consideration to drivers and passengers as our vans. And I guess not just our sort of passengers and drivers, but actually anyone who has to interact with these vehicles. So you'll notice on the bottom right hand side that the seats actually are on a cantilever. And this is because we know that cleaners only have 4 minutes to clean each bus at the end of each day. So we want to limit any kind of sort of grooves or spaces that they have to clean around so that we can create the cleanest bus possible in the shortest amount of time. So how have we been doing this? Why do we think that we have a method that has achieved substantially cheaper products than our competitors? Well, really it comes down to sort of something that we describe as the new method, and this comes down to sort of 5 key components. So the first of which is plug and play components. Now these are made completely in-house. We sort of pride ourselves on being very vertically integrated, and importantly, they're made within a size architecture. And really what that means is that our vehicles and their components can go together a bit like a sort of a Tetris or Lego-like model. And aside from having very easy assembly, that also means that swapping or upgrading components also becomes exceptionally easy as well. Additionally, they're also completely software enabled, so that means that we can conduct a lot of predictive and preventative maintenance by tracking each of those components. Next, we have our modular skateboard platform, so called because it's sort of completely flat, much like a skateboard. And this houses our chassis and powertrain. And owing to sort of its configuration being completely flat, it allows us a lot of flexibility, and also for our vans to be able to use the maximum amount of cargo space possible. We also have this really, really interesting composite material that, again, we've developed completely in-house. So unlike many traditional automotive manufacturers, we don't use steel or aluminium body panels, but instead use this proprietary composite material. And the advantage of that is that it's incredibly lightweight, which, as we know, sort of is a useful consideration when we start to think about battery range, but it's also very, very highly durable, and commercial vehicles go through a substantial amount of wear and tear. So that's a really important consideration. And again, probably most interestingly, they're fully recyclable and super low cost, both with regards to the material itself and also the tooling. And that means that we can make these panels very, very quickly as well. And finally, we have our digital ecosystem. So as I mentioned, many of our components are software enabled, and this means that we can create a number of supporting tools and services such as fleet management portals, driver apps, even our internal tools that we use within Arrival to start to kind of really optimize the operation of our vehicles out on the road. So I think really sort of epitomizes the whole concept of device on wheels. And that also means that, you know, this is a continuously improving set of operations and vehicles, and we can garner a huge amount of insights from their operation as well. So really this starts to tell you that actually sustainability is a really core part of our DNA and is considered at every single juncture of a design decision. Everything that we do is around sort of trying to extend the usable life of the vehicles, maximizing the absolute bandwidth of our technologies and leveraging the insights that we're gathering so that we can have this continuous improvement. But I think possibly more interesting than all of that is that because of this new method and the way that we design and the way things come together, we can manufacture these vehicles in microfactories, which have a very small footprint, a reasonably low cost compared to our competitors, and can importantly be deployed in local areas. So this is our one in Bicester, so just outside of Oxford. We have one that's sort of similar in size in Banbury, which is, we do a bit of assembly there, but it's much more of an R&D centre. And this is our one in Rock Hill in South Carolina, which is very close to our North American headquarters in Charlotte. And as Roger sort of briefly mentioned, we announced yesterday that we have an additional microfactory located sort of about 15 minutes away from this one in a place called Meadow Oak in North Carolina. And you can kind of get a sense of just how small these facilities are, which so you can see sort of from the size of a vehicle there that actually they can start to fit in existing warehouses, which means that they can be located close to urban centres. And to give you some idea of like the fact that this actually is small, because obviously it does look like a large building, this is around 1/11 of the size of a traditional automotive manufacturing plant. And part of the reason that we've been able to do this is because instead of having a big, large snaking assembly line, we actually manufacture in these small robotic cells. And the reason that we're able to do that is because our vehicles are so modular and come together very simply, which means that you can start to maximize the capability of each of these robotic operations rather than having to have this linear step-by-step sort of snaking process. So owing to this small footprint, it means that they can be deployed much closer to urban centres. We can have many more of them, which reduces our need for sort of polluting onward logistics that you would have if you had one centralised manufacturing unit. And also they can start to create local jobs. They can be supported by an entirely localised supply chain. And it also means that the vehicles that we're producing are then going to be used in the community in which they're built as well. But what else? We've spoken about sort of extending the usable life, maximising the capability of our technologies, creating local jobs. Also worth noting that these microfactories, we aim to have as much sort of renewable energy and as low carbon footprint as possible. But what else can we as Arrival do? Well, what am I really talking about here? I guess our vehicles have this enormous capability to provide a vast amount of insights. And they're also part of this mobility ecosystem, which we know directly impacts people's access to goods, services, communities, and economic opportunity. And this can start to have a number of unintended consequences by starting to change the very fabric of cities, from how they grow, where people live, and innumerate quality of life indicators. And then if you throw into the mix the fact that smart city initiatives will also, in which sort of transportation, data, digital and physical infrastructure all become very intrinsically linked, we can see that for Arrival, armed with this technology and our social conscience, we can start to do quite a bit more. Now, I'm just going to illustrate this with a couple of examples. So, for example, this is a map of New York, and as we know, public transit has suffered severe loss of ridership owing to the coronavirus pandemic. But as we can also see, in New York, bus ridership has recovered much better in poorer neighbourhoods and communities, which is challenging because it promises to exacerbate any kind of cultural perceptions of bus travel, which ultimately could reduce available funding for those communities that are most dependent on that public transit. Equally, in Atlanta, this was a very, very interesting study. So we know that the availability of public transit directly impacts people's access to economic opportunity. So in Atlanta, they proved that if they increased the bus service by 40%, they could increase the number of jobs available or sort of reachable within 30 minutes on transit by a factor of 9. And then once you consider other things like spatial agglomeration, reduced congestion, larger, bigger, diverse talent pools for employers, you can start to see all of these additional sort of exponential benefits as well. And the challenges are pretty similar for commercial vehicles as well. So according to the World Economic Forum, the number of delivery vehicles will increase by about 36% in the top 100 cities over the next 10 years. But where are the electric vehicles being deployed, and which are the areas that have the current highest volume of polluting traffic? Well, typically, and this is true of most places in the world, poor communities tend to live near busier roads or industrial areas, and that means that they are exponentially more exposed to air pollutants, and sort of this growing number of delivery vehicles is driving that bigger gap in environmental injustice. So as arrivals, we start to think about our go-to-market strategies and our deployment strategies. These are the sorts of considerations that we can really start to bake into those plans. So what are we doing about it? Well, firstly, we really need to start to understand our cities and their challenges with the same rigor and attention to detail that we do for our commercial customers. But cities are complicated and unwieldy and very vast interconnected ecosystems, and we absolutely cannot profess to be experts. And that's why we need to form these really strong partnerships and collaborations with cities, such that we can start to see how transportation and mobility can start to be this force to target specific sustainability challenges or sort of social issues for the city as well. And this can take a number of different forms. So from education and engagement, which we know, well, I guess we sort of kind of forget as people who are so involved in the sort of electric vehicle space that actually there is a tremendous amount of engagement and education that still needs to be done. And for many, these technologies are still considered very new and in some instances a little bit scary. We can also start to look at various smart data approaches. So how can we sort of leverage the insights that are coming from our vehicles? We can look at public-private partnerships and various sort of pilot projects that can look at various sustainable mobility initiatives, workforce development, not just within our microfactories, but also in the sort of service network and also charging infrastructure deployment as well as any other kind of zero emission city initiatives, such as zero emission areas. And we know that if we sort of consider all of those things together, actually the city can start to be informed by how our mobility solutions are being used. So for example, zero emission freight zones or pedestrian areas. And equally, that's going to have an additional feedback loop in that it will start to inform the evolution of our products and services as well. So to give you a bit of an example about this, in December last year, we announced our North American headquarters in Charlotte in North Carolina. Charlotte's a reasonably small city with a population of about 1 million. And we signed this memorandum of understanding to identify key areas of collaboration that could help the city to reach their strategic energy action plan, which is their plan to how Charlotte can become a low carbon city by 2050. And as we're currently sort of pre-production at this stage, it's been much more around workforce development initiatives, how we can partner with local universities, provide mentorship opportunities, to also things like adapting the curriculum at the local community colleges to account for the amount of robotics that we have within our microfactories as well. We're also looking at sort of other studies to understand how mobility operates within the city. So here you can see a number of different maps of Charlotte showing various different indicators. And within each one, you can start to see that this particular area, in an area called the Arc of Charlotte or the Eastern Arc of Charlotte, is particularly problematic. It's very vulnerable to displacement, so gentrification. It's an incredibly non-white population and also has a much lower income area. And so when we start to think about improving accessibility to bus networks, this might be an area that garners much more of our attention and focus, and we can start to work with the city to really understand what we need to do, right from sort of engaging with that community through to actually deploying the charging infrastructure and those additional routes. And again, sort of not just thinking about traditional bus routes, but also sort of demand responsive transit as well. I won't dwell too much on that because it's a vast interconnected diagram, but essentially just sort of illustrating my point that we're working with cities, they're influencing, we have this opportunity to influence how those cities function, but in turn, those cities will start to influence the sort of future evolution of our products. So to conclude, our ambitions as a company and sustainability go way beyond just our vehicles and manufacture, but actually really focus on creating very resilient systems that can enable these radically better cities. So if you have any questions, please do let me know. You can find me on LinkedIn, and thank you very much for listening.
Wowzers, Imogen. Honestly, wowzers. That's what I'm thinking. And I've written a few words. That was great. Great presentation. Spot on 20 minutes as well. I've written down holistic, forensic, human, societal. And do you know what I liked about a presentation? You didn't mention once top speed or 0 to 60 acceleration. You know, and, you know, we all know what EVs can do, and yeah, some of those aspects of things like that are important to some people, but what's lovely about what you're doing there is so much of it, and it was shown in that video as you mentioned, isn't about just the product. It's about the bigger picture. It's about urban operating, defined mileage, back to base vehicles, and the huge challenge of trying to democratize mobility. So it's refreshing perspective, I have to say. So of course there are plenty of questions that are coming in. We're going to ask those after we've heard from Daniel. So if you'd like to sit tight for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to invite, thank you for that. Don't worry, there'll be plenty of questions. I'd like to invite Daniel Musenga-Grant to the stage. He's environmental consultant at Hgv Systems. So yes, and also, have you got two jobs, Daniel? Because it says DMG Environmental Consultancy and Hgv Systems. Are you doing two jobs at once?
So I have my own environmental consultancy. I do work for Hgv Systems through that, but I was also an employee of Hgv Systems before I started DMG. So it's a kind of an amalgamation of both.
Gotcha. Well, look, welcome to the stage. You have 20 minutes, and then we're going to have a good 20-minute Q&A. There's loads coming in for Imogen. That's why I didn't want to chit-chat with her. After that, I wanted to get through as many of them as possible. Okay. So likewise, for your presentation, the stage is yours, my friend.
Great. I'm just sharing my screen. Get started. Okay, is that clear? Everyone?
Yep, got that clear. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you.
I'll get started. Great. So I'm here today to talk to you about hope and hydrogen economy. My name is Daniel Musenga-Grant, and first of all, I'd like to say that there is hope. There's a problem, but there's hope, and together we can face climate change head on. We need to keep pushing and innovating, and we need to keep going, because fatalism is going to be the end of the environment. I believe that we're stewards, and that it's our responsibility to look after this world that we've been given. One sector that's working on this problem is the hydrogen economy, and the hydrogen economy is all of the work, the sectors and the jobs surrounding the generation, distribution and the use of hydrogen. Hydrogen is a zero emissions fuel, and it can be produced using renewable methods, so that's good for the environment. A bit about myself, I run my environmental consultancy, DMG, but I was also one of the first employees at Hgvs, and I'm part of the project execution team that's delivering our vehicles. I've got a background in biology and environmental management, both of them because I was interested in interactions. So biology, what are the interactions between plants, animals and the environment? And then environmental management, what is our interaction with our environment? How can we have the buildings we want and the roads that we want to have? How can we produce the energy we need and grow the crops that we need without impacting our environment negatively? How can we do that in the best way? So kind of my passion for the environment and kind of a bit of renewables kind of combined with Hgv Systems, which is vehicles that can be powered by fuel produced renewably. onto the issue at hand, climate change. I saw this graphic almost a year ago, and I think it still sums up where we are now. If you can't read the wee speech bubble, it says, "Be sure to wash your hands and all will be well." And then that small red wave at the bottom is COVID-19. And then we have the recession wave behind, which we're starting to see now. And then behind that, we've got climate change and biodiversity collapse. And you can figure out how much hand washing is going to help us when we get to that stage. Now, this is an event called the Future of Greentech Transport. So I hope that you, of all people, don't need a lecture about the seriousness of climate change. At Hgvs, we were recently reminded as a team how important it is to never lose sight of why we do what we do. We had the Paris Agreement in 2015, where the global community were coming into Glasgow, COP26 in November. That's the city I'm in at the moment. And sadly, it's looking like we've pretty much locked in to miss that 1.5 target. We have a good understanding of some of the impacts that will bring. Websites like the Carbon Brief cover temperature, rain, ice, oceans, drought, crops, nature, the economy, health, so many different things. And they also look at specific geographical areas. They also take their evidence from scientific papers, so these aren't just prophecies of doom. But there are also things that we don't understand. This other picture in the left-hand corner there is a really striking picture I saw of land subsidence caused by the permafrost melting in Siberia. We don't know all of the impacts this is going to have. There's a potential that this might lead to runaway climate change. Mary Robson, who is the ex-Prime Minister of Ireland and the face of climate justice is the idea that it is wrong for people to suffer the impacts of climate change that was caused by others. She says that the worst thing we can do is think there's nothing that we can do. So that is why hope is so important. We always need to be talking about the solutions. We can't just be sitting around talking about how bad it can be. So what are those solutions? There's so many out there. There are natural solutions. The earth can generally self-regulate. Plants are great carbon sinks, and though forests get all of the PR, they're actually only the 5th most efficient ecosystem in the carbon storage cycle. We have salt marshes, mangrove forests, seagrass meadows, and tundra are actually, tundra is the best one. We've got big tree planting initiatives across the world, especially in 11 countries in Africa and in China, where they're having the Great Green Wall initiatives to try and stop the Gobi and Sahara deserts encroaching. Finally, we're moving back into the development of unnatural carbon capture. Basically, that's the reverse of the oil and gas industry, where you capture the CO2 as it's produced and you bury it underground again. This can also be done using direct air capture, which is pictured in the top right of this slide. I think that direct air capture should be done using renewables, otherwise you're just going to produce more as you're trying to get rid of it. Renewables, of course, are one of our main solutions to this problem. Production has increased massively, but so has our demand for energy. We need to also reduce our consumption somehow, or we'll just end up keep on using more fossil fuels. The good news is that renewables are on the rise. Back in 2008, in the UK, energy mix was 81.2% fossil fuels, 5% renewables. But in 2018, that was 44% fossil fuels and 33.1% renewables. And it's only going to get better. Though I think we have to keep an eye out on this new coal mine that the government's trying to open in Cumbria. Renewables they're really good for electricity, but they're not so good for heating. And that's where we can start to talk about hydrogen. In both Fife and Aberdeen here in Scotland, there are plans to trial 300 homes heated entirely by hydrogen. Where else can hydrogen be used? Of course, it can be used in the transport industry. Obviously, we could walk, we could cycle, we could take public transport to reduce our emissions, or we could avoid transport entirely, which we're all very practiced at now as I speak to you from the spare room in my house. But humans do like to get from A to B, and since we've got cars, we love to do that in comfort. It's estimated that there are 1.42 billion vehicles on the roads worldwide, and that doesn't include mining and farm vehicles. Transport is about 14% of global emissions, but that's higher if you count just carbon emissions. In the UK, we're slowly increasing our number of ultra-low emission vehicles, but we are way behind countries like Norway, which has the most per capita, and China, which just has the most. But China generally has the most of everything. However, there are some limits to battery technology that means it won't cover all of our needs, such as grid and space constraints on charging, low energy density and for larger vehicles, and issues with lithium supply. But that just means that we need other options as well. Hydrogen is the most promising of these. It's zero emissions. It can be produced by renewables. It can be used for energy storage, and which means you don't need to take the electricity out of the grid there and then. You can store it and use it when needed. This also means, because of the renewables, that local production is possible for hydrogen. There are lots of different types of fuel cell, but PEM, or proton electron membrane, is the most common. They were invented by William Grove, who's a Welsh physicist, and that was back in 1838. But these two pictures on the right here, that's how one looks now. You see this silver bit in the lower one, that is the fuel cell stack. Each of the different lines of a fuel cell is called a cell, and together they're called the stack. So I'll take you quickly through how a hydrogen fuel cell works. Basically, hydrogen comes in and it is separated from its electron at the anode. The electron goes off and powers something, say a light bulb or an electric motor. Then the electron comes back and is reattached with oxygen from the atmosphere and the hydrogen again at the cathode, and this produces water. The only byproducts of a fuel cell are heat and water. What are some of the issues of hydrogen? So hydrogen is a gas, and which means it takes up a lot of room. So for transport, it's stored at 350 or 700 bar pressure, and it takes extremely strong tanks to store it like that. When we used to come to conferences in person, we would always get asked about the safety of hydrogen, and something that would always come up is the Hindenburg Disaster. This was back in 1937, and it's where 36 people were killed when this exploded. However, this was a canvas bubble powered by internal combustion engines, and as amazing as the engineers of the past were, I would say that this was an accident waiting to happen. This is how hydrogen is stored now. It is exceedingly safe. This Toyota tank has 3 layers: an outer glass fiber reinforced layer that protects against surface abrasions, a middle strong layer made from carbon fiber reinforced plastic, and an inner plastic lined layer to prevent leakage. I watched a video of this tank, and it took 2 50 caliber bullets hitting the same point to rupture it. So it's very strong, and even if it does rupture, it does have a controlled pressure relief, and hydrogen is 14 times lighter than air, so it just dissipates into the atmosphere instead of gathering in flammable puddles beneath you, as our current fuel choices do. There are now plans to roll out hydrogen infrastructure across the world and across this country. And we at Hgv Systems and others are working on that, and we already have the technology that we need to do that. It also makes more sense to create infrastructure for an actually zero emissions fuel instead of for LNG or CNG gas, which is a temporary and still emitting solution. Hydrogen isn't found in its pure form on Earth, so it needs to be extracted before it can be used. It's already produced in large volumes as part of industrial processes such as steam methane reforming or anaerobic digesters, but the ultimate goal is to use electrolysis. Electro is electricity and lysis is splitting. So it's just the splitting of water with electricity. It's the reverse of a fuel cell. Water is split into hydrogen and oxygen, and hydrogen is captured. The amazing thing about electrolysis is it can be done using renewable electricity, making it 100% renewable zero emission fuel, or green hydrogen as we call it. Electrolysis also opens up several possibilities for the energy sector. It gives us the opportunity for grid balancing, which can protect the grid from overheating due to excess renewable generation on an especially windy day or an especially sunny day. It also gives us opportunities for energy storage. Electricity is quite hard to store, and batteries are expensive and they lose charge over time. But hydrogen, once you've produced it, just sits there in its tank, and you can use it when you need it or convert it back into electricity. That brings us back to HV system. Our goal is to achieve net zero in the heavy-duty transport sector by introducing a range of zero-emission commercial vehicles to the market. Eventually, this will cover all applications from 5 to 44 tonnes, but for now, we're focusing on a medium-duty chassis cab MCV or van and a 4x2 articulate HGV tractor unit. Both of these vehicles are hydrogen-powered, utilising cutting-edge hydrogen fuel cell technology, industry-leading electronic axles, and a wealth of other market-leading components throughout the powertrain. Hgvs is a systems integrator, bringing together world-leading components and packaging them into our innovative vehicle designs. Our prototype build for a van is currently underway, and we have completed an in-depth Innovate UK funded feasibility study for a truck, with prototype build due to commence next year. We've got a highly experienced team and advisory board, and we've secured all the key partners required for our project. A few especially noteworthy members of our team to deliver this ambitious plan are Steve Clayton, our CTO, and Pete Clark, our head of design, who have worked on zero-emission vehicles from notepad to production in the past, including the LECV van. I also want to point your attention to Dr. David Telford, our head of sustainability, who recently helped Aberdeen to install hydrogen refuelling at their Aberdeen Exhibition and Conference Centre. The rest of our team are also highly qualified in their fields, with a blend of industry, business, and financial experience. We have a close working relationship with our suppliers of our powertrain components and also to produce our demonstrator vehicles. We aren't creating these prototypes in a vacuum. UPS and other end users are working with us to ensure that our zero-emission vehicles meet their industry needs. Part of that means carrying out extensive market and competitor analysis. Diesel vehicles still occupy 97.9% of the HGV market. Therefore, our vehicles and arrivals, which we heard from earlier, they're required to meet the stringent European emissions reduction targets of 15% by 2025 and 30% by 2030. HGVs make up only 2.1% of EU road transport, but they account for 27% of emissions, and 68% of those are attributed to the 4x2 tractor unit that we're focusing on as our first demonstrator truck, which unlocks massive potential for emission savings. There is also a strong market pull for both of our truck and van based on our end user partners' requirements. We expect hydrogen to reach total cost of ownership parity with diesel by 2030. But there are already market, environmental, legislative, and grant funding opportunities in play. The current European HGV market is dominated by 7 vehicles owned by only 5 automotive groups. Our analysis found that there was less than 100 millimeters difference between the size of their cabs. New legislation gives us huge opportunities for innovation within this slow-moving and conservative sector. For example, our cab is 800 millimeters longer, giving improved driver and road user safety, increased driver comfort, and better aerodynamic performance, amongst other benefits. One of the main USPs of HVS is that we are a small, highly skilled and innovative team. The environmental benefits of our project are staggering. Securing only 2.5% of the European market, our trucks would save 104 tonnes of CO2, 165 kilograms of NOx, and 4 kilograms of particulate matter every year each. To put that into context, should we reach our 2.5% market goals, this will result in more savings per annum than the entire emissions output of Heathrow Airport. We're not the only ones operating in the hydrogen transport sector. There are quite a few prototypes coming through on the commercial vehicle market. We have the Honda Clarity, the Toyota Mirai, and the Hyundai Nexo, amongst others, in the car market. There are other more niche applications, such as Element 1's hydrogen plane. There's the potential for hydrogen-powered tanker ships carrying hydrogen between countries, which is already being considered between Australia and Japan. We've got hydrogen forklift trucks. We've even got hydrogen drones. And of course, we've got public transport. These are the Aberdeen hydrogen buses, which is the largest fleet in Europe, and they're also the first ones to have double-decker buses. Finally, we've got the Alstrom hydrogen train, It's already running in Germany, and it's been trialled in the UK as well. So these two are overviews of the hydrogen economy. On the left, we have Japan's overview of their hydrogen economy. Japan is the most advanced country at just going for it, with the delayed Olympics this year set to be the hydrogen Olympics. But any country could follow this plan and implement the hydrogen economy. The map shows many different things, lots of which I've covered today, and this model, as I said, could be followed by any country. It talks about the different means of hydrogen production, all the different ways it can be transported both within the country and abroad. It covers using it for electricity, for transport, for businesses, for the public, for heating is in there as well. Japan wanted to be ready for the hydrogen economy by 2020, but they plan to have it fully implemented into their society by 2030. On the right here, we've got a more simplified diagram. It shows all of our energy generation means, so fossil fuels, nuclear, renewables, which go into the grid. These can be used to produce hydrogen. This hydrogen can then be used for many different things. So transport, fertilizer, it can be used for heating, as I said, or it can be converted back into electricity and used in the grid when needed. The hydrogen economy is going to produce so many jobs in the production, distribution, and all the ways that hydrogen can be used. There's going to be so many new businesses popping up. There's going to be massive economic growth. We're going to have the removal of carbon emissions. We're going to be able to fully utilize our renewable energy. It's also going to give us energy security, as you can produce it locally. So instead of relying on a gas pipeline from Russia or tankers arriving from Saudi Arabia, you can produce the hydrogen within your own country, wherever you are. We've also got the opportunity in vehicles to reduce the battery size, which is good for recycling and waste purposes because fuel cells are mostly recyclable. We get the quick refueling times we're used to with petrol and diesel. And we also get quite a long range because the only thing that's limiting your range is how much hydrogen you can store on board. There's also a lot of innovations going around and inventions around ammonia as a transport solution. Not on the vehicles, but moving the fuel around countries. The hydrogen economy is ready to happen. It's starting to happen in some countries who are willing to take the first steps. And the UK is in a great position to become a hydrogen leader. With all that Aberdeen is doing, and we have many of our hydrogen companies across the country. And of course, you've got us at Hgvs. In summary, we feel we are the right company to bring hydrogen-powered commercial vehicles to the UK and EU market. Because we address 3 points of the government's 10-point plan to reach net zero, we continue the environmental gains seen during the recent COVID-19 lockdowns. Our vehicles will achieve TCO parity with diesel by at most 2030. This project also provides opportunities for sales and tax revenue for the country, job creation and strengthening the UK's zero-emission automotive supply chain. In summary, we're ready to go ahead of this project. We have the end users like UPS in place. We have the component suppliers ready to go, and we have an experienced delivery team who have already completed similar projects. That's part of where I find my hope for the future. But where will you find yours? Because it's out there. There's hope in rewilding and planting trees, in reducing our energy consumption and producing more in renewable ways, in sucking tons of CO2 out of the air and storing it underground where it belongs, and in creating zero-emission vehicles and producing countless more carbon-saving initiatives. We have the ability, we have the technology, and we have the drive. And that's where I think the hope is. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Daniel. That's a passionate plea in many aspects, you know, global as well as your own business and what you're doing there. Fantastic. So please stay with us. Imogen, if you'd like to come back to the stage, we've got a bunch of questions. What I liked about both your presentations there is they were personal. It's something I notice much more so now. Maybe it's my age, I don't know, but a lot of people doing work like you've just described, you're not doing it just to get a paycheck. You're doing it because you believe in it. You're doing it because it's a passion that you have. And I think that delivers an extraordinary energy to things, far more than perhaps, you know, a few things I've done in the past where, yeah, You're really mainly doing it for the money, to be honest. So good. Bravo to both of you. Let's go straight into the questions then. I did suggest to people if they didn't want to go on mic, they didn't have to. And so Doug would like me to read his question. It's this: with regular software updates, will Arrival be introducing increasing levels of autonomy? And what time frame do you see vehicles becoming totally autonomous? I guess he's thinking partly because of your one of your other companies, Robo Race, and some of what you said, Imogen. So what's the answer to Doug, please?
So I think I'm going to end up giving the slightly PR-y answer. So apologies for that in advance.
That's not like you.
But essentially, most of our kind of automated driving features are very much focused towards advanced driver assistance and focusing on improving the safety of our vehicles. So vans and buses typically don't have particularly sophisticated software, but we really want to make sure that we've got things like cyclist detection and sort of emergency braking and that kind of thing. With regards to additional layers or levels of autonomy, we're obviously sort of looking at autonomy as a sort of research piece, and as every other sort of automotive manufacturer is. But I really can't give a sort of a clear answer as to how those vehicles will be updated. And I think, to be honest, we have to take a steer from the unions that are impacted by our vans, and also the legislative environment that sits around autonomous vehicles. So technical side, yes, we can look at, but need to take a steer from how it's perceived more globally. Right.
Okay. Yeah, it's going to get tricky, isn't it? Doug actually asked two questions, and I'm going to let him sneak in his second one because I'm just going to read it out. And it's actually for you, Daniel. How do hydrogen gas turbines compare with fuel cells for efficiency? Are there an option for Hgvs either for fuel extenders or direct drive?
Can you repeat the last bit about that question?
How do hydrogen gas turbines compare with fuel cells for efficiency? Are they an option for Hgvs either as fuel extenders or range extenders or direct drive?
Yep, so Hgvs, we're looking at a fuel cell. We're not looking at a gas turbine because it's zero emissions, we feel, whereas a gas turbine, there's the potential for sulfur dioxide to be produced during the burning for the gas turbine. So it's much better than a petrol diesel engine, but it's still not quite the 100% zero emissions that we're looking at.
Okay.
We're also trying to use, obviously on a hydrogen vehicle, it is an electric vehicle. So there will be a battery that runs the electric motors. So our goal is to try and maximize the size of the fuel cell and reduce the size of the battery as much as possible. So we're not looking to just make the hydrogen fuel cell a range extender. We're looking to build the entire vehicle platform around that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to invite David Mitchell to the stage. David, if you're there, good, you are. That was nice and quick. So David, please ask your question in person to either Daniel or Imogen.
My question is to Imogen. Thank you very much for a great presentation. I was just very intrigued about your microfactories, and with your body in white, what's your plan? Is it to make all those panels in-house within your microfactory? That's my first question. And then my second one, I noticed on your slide that you said you're not painting your vehicles. Is it your intent then to wrap your vehicles if the customer requires them? So I just wondered what your plan of action was for finishing off the vehicles prior to sending to customer.
Yep, so we're manufacturing the body panels in-house within the microfactories. And it's actually an amazing process because the composite material looks like a fabric when you first sort of look at it, and then how it's treated within the microfactory and sort of stamped, that's when it becomes the sort of the body panel and how you'd expect it in a vehicle. We want to avoid painting just because it becomes it's highly polluting. So for our customers that would require our vehicles to be wrapped, we'd absolutely do that. And we know that that's sort of much easier, particularly to sort of cope with wear and tear, than it would be to sort of constantly have to do repaint jobs.
Good question. Thanks, David. Great question.
Is it possible just to go back on one point?
Yeah, go on quick.
Just on the body again, because it's an FRP, GRP process. Have you worked out the value stream map and it's commercially viable, your processes? Oh,
yeah. So I'm not going to sort of delve too much into it, but Absolutely. Yeah, there's been lots of work to look at sort of the commercial viability of our proposal. It's sort of in progress and scaling up at the moment. Yeah, so it's a robust process.
That's great.
Good question, David. You can it sounds you clearly know what you're talking about. So I'd like to go to Simon or Jan again next, if they're around. I think we've got Simon. There we go. Simon Maloney. You've got a nice, simple question, Simon. So fire away. We'll unmute your microphone and then you can ask it yourself. So yes, fire away, Simon. It's all yours, Simon. Where you go.
We've got two Simons, is it?
Yeah, no, Simon Maloney I'm after. Sorry, Simon Maloney. It's you. You're on. Okay, I'll tell you what, I'll ask for him in this case. How can I invest in Arrival? Simon's asking, Simon Maloney.
Ooh, I don't know if I can answer that question, but if you do some Googling, I'm sure you'll find out.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Well, you've gone through the SPAC route in America. I know that. That's public knowledge. So it's on the NASDAQ and it has a value. And I think a lot of people, the more they hear your story, are going to be interested. I should say no more than that because I'm not a financial person or anything in that regard. Simon Garwood is also there. So Simon, would you like to ask your question? If Simon Garwood, they're all becoming shy. I don't know what it is. I think you've both given them such a blasting presentation. There's not a lot more to say, but I know they're there. So we'll try and get them up. I tell you what, I'll ask Jan's question. Hi, Imogen. How easily would traditional OEMs be able to adopt an Arrival type manufacturing method? Will Arrival be a supplier to OEMs or a competitor?
This is a really interesting question. So I think the challenge with OEMs is that there is a supply chain, an existing sort of an assembly line at the end of their operation. So actually having an opportunity to sort of put everything down, go back to the drawing board and think about how to fundamentally redesign everything that sort of goes into making a vehicle is challenging because there is that assembly line at the end of the day. So I don't know sort of how difficult it would be to sort of pivot an entire operation, but I think the advantage that Arrival has had is that we haven't had that pressure. We've had the time to sort of really sort of go away, optimize this as much as possible, and come up with a sort of a really flexible solution. So I think that's a long-winded way of saying, because we're new, we've been given that license to kind of really experiment. Right.
Okay. Simon's just let us know he doesn't have a mic. That's why we couldn't hear him. Now, I don't know how close he was to my office or yours, but, you know, I don't think shouting would have worked either. But Simon, I'm glad we got to ask your question. I hope that was useful. So we've got Atola Tajabadi, hopefully around. If not, Daria Shulakova. I'll go. There's, yes. So, Atola, your question, fire away, please. In fact, you've got two, so I'm going to let you sneak them both in. If you can make them nice and quick, you can ask both of them, because I know one's for Imogen and one's for Daniel.
All right, thanks so much. Yeah, so first of all, thank you guys. Great talk, both of you. Very fascinating and very informative. For Imogen, I was wondering, how do you guys feel about sort of the level of technology you guys are developing and how it could sort of be implemented into developing countries, especially like the really fast growing cities like Dar es Salaam and these kind of places? Do you think that there's a place for this kind of technology over there, or is it too soon?
Yeah, there is 100% sort of space for this, and this is something that we're actively exploring as an organization, that how can we, when we say we have this very scalable and deployable solution, actually what does that look like for any city in the world? A lot of the challenges do come down to EV infrastructure, and that being sort of a key driver to the appetite for certain cities to sort of adopt electric vehicles. So that's something that in the sort of discussion with smaller cities or developing cities, those need to be a key integral part of the decision-making process as well.
Yeah,
okay, thank you. So your question to Daniel is about partnerships, I think, isn't it? So yeah.
Kind of, yeah, sorry.
Go on, fire away.
I was trying to figure out where sort of Hgvs fits into everything. So do you feel that Hgvs is more of like a middleman where your focus is sort of hydrogen fuel technology, and then the sort of the rest of the technology is developed by sort of manufacturers like BMW, and you combine these two? Or is Hgvs ultimately trying to be a company that builds everything from scratch like a rival?
No, we're not trying to build everything from scratch. As I said, we're a systems integrator. So instead of being a component producer, we are bringing together lots of different experts from different sectors. So a fuel cell expert, a drivetrain expert, and then we are doing the packaging for that. So it's quite complex to get everything you need into a vehicle, because vehicles are limited in size, especially commercial vehicles. So our role is designing the vehicles, getting everything packaged, picking the best components that are available. We're also looking at licensing. So eventually, instead of having to manufacture all of our vehicles, we have, similar to the skateboard platform Imogen showed, we've got a similar skateboard platform, but for a hydrogen commercial vehicle. So that could be licensed out to others and get hydrogen vehicles out there much quicker.
Hey, Daniel, you haven't been sneaking around their factory, have you?
No, definitely not.
I'm only teasing.
We've been aware of Arrival since we started, but no.
Yeah. Okay. Bruno, Miles, and Daria hopefully are around. If we can get those up, we'll get those questions asked. Just before we do, then, let me ask you this. Oh no, we've got Bruno. Good. There you go, Bruno. The stage is yours. I think you asked the first question, and you've got something that's kind of, yeah. This is an interesting question for Imogen, but I'm sure Daniel's going to listen intently. Bruno, fire away. Hopefully Bruno's got a mic. Well, I tell you what, I'm going to assume it's a similar thing to as we had earlier. Hasn't got a mic. So here's the question. No, maybe not. Hi, Imogen, says Bruno. Given your modular approach and skateboard platform capabilities, are you considering hydrogen powertrains as a possibility for your vehicles? You're going to be interested in this answer, aren't you, Daniel?
So I think our sort of approach has been that the modular skateboard means that we can be fairly powertrain agnostic. Obviously, we would never want to go down a petrol diesel route. We are prioritizing electric vehicles and electric powertrains, but owing to our sort of modularity and flexibility, it could be that that's an option in the future.
Right.
Toyota's approach. So Toyota, they've got the Prius, which means was their electric vehicle. And then they've got the Mirai, which came from the Prius, and Mirai means future, which is the hydrogen one. So the really important thing is we're getting electric powertrains out there, because that can lead to zero emissions. And then from that electric powertrain, you can use battery electric or hydrogen.
I always like to say, not trying to pick you up on anything, but zero tailpipe emissions. Just so the people that completely pile in on, oh yes, but, because then that way you can have a different conversation. Bruno, I think you might be there. I think your mic might be unmuted now. Can you hear us? Unfortunately not. No, I was just going to see if we could. Oh, he can hear us, but we can't hear him. Look, there was a great question. We can't hear you, I'm afraid, Bruno. I know I can see you in the chat saying that, but next time I'm sure it will work. Miles or Daria, I don't know if you're there. We've got a couple of more questions. We've got a couple of more minutes, so we should be able to slip those in. Miles, you're there, so yes, fire away, please.
I've been rereading my question, and I didn't really write it all that well, but I was keen to get it in as I was thinking about it. My understanding is that hydrogen production is good when you've got a lot of excess electricity, because certainly it's more efficient to use it in a battery electric vehicle, certainly from a car's perspective. But and then that kind of led me to think, well, okay, potentially the longer future of hydrogen is really interesting. And then certainly it's better used in larger vehicles. But I don't know what, I don't get a clear picture as to what the cost, let's say, per mile. I think you mentioned total cost of ownership parity in 2030, did you say?
Yeah.
But I think it's generally the cost, because clearly it's not for cars. So I was surprised to see Enterprise looking at bringing them on. But for bigger vehicles, and the weight of batteries is going to be an issue, transporting per mile. So I wonder if you've got a simple perspective as to what it actually looks like, because I get a feeling hydrogen is expensive at the moment. So what does the cost look like per mile for a hydrogen heavy vehicle? Or do you see the future actually? Because my perspective is the future of hydrogen on mass would be better supporting charging electric vehicles, because as the cost of batteries come down, they become more dense, that actually it would be better placed when there's more production of electricity supporting charging infrastructure at capacity.
Okay, have a crack at that, Daniel.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I can't give you a cost per mile off the top of my head, but our total cost of ownership looks at everything. Another reason that we're going for commercial vehicles, and it's not just because of the size, is because they often follow set routes. So instead of having, so as you mentioned with cars, that hydrogen isn't going to work. I do disagree. I think that once the infrastructure is out there, once we have a hydrogen refueling station every 5 miles, like we have a petrol station, then cars work, of course. But at the moment, for commercial vehicles, you just basically need one at the depot and one at the route that they're going to, and that can fuel an entire fleet. So we've worked out that only 4 stations could get all the cargo that comes from when we're going for commercial vehicles. It's so easy to get the refueling infrastructure in place compared to a public vehicle.
It was breaking up a little bit there, Daniel, but we got the gist of that. Thank you, Miles. That was a great question. I know we could talk a lot more, but we're in the interest of just keeping to the time frame that we have. We're going to move on, but thank you for that. Last question goes to Daria. So there you are. It's all yours. You have the last question of the session. So I hope it's a good one. No pressure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the talks. They were really amazing. Imogen, is Arrival working with charging station companies to accommodate for all the vans and buses, or will Arrival be making their own charging stations later in the future? And then my second question is leading on from that, how long can an Arrival van or bus travel without charging?
Yeah, great question. So increasingly, we absolutely know that charging infrastructure is like the biggest barrier to electric vehicle adoption, and particularly when we have discussions with cities and sort of upgrading depots, etc. So the short answer is yes, we're absolutely talking to charging point operators and to utilities, particularly in the US as well. And our sort of longer term objective is that we need to be able to look as holistically as possible at the entire ecosystem and everything that sort of Arrival needs to operate, to be able to operate efficiently. The second part of your question with regards to range, so it really depends on your battery size. So for some routes that could mean that we can go up to 400 kilometers, but 9 times out of 10 we know that customers just do not need that. So for example, a UPS driver in London might only be driving 30 miles a day, and so it would be a lighter vehicle and just has the sort of number of batteries that they actually need to be able to complete their route. So essentially you can have anything from sort of 100 kilometers up to 400 kilometers and everything in between.
Okay, thank you so much.
Great question, Daria. Yeah, and a lot of people would have wanted to ask that question, so they'll be glad you did. Thank you. So look, we're going to wrap up now and conclude. Can I just say this? I'm not as clever as you two. I can't talk in the way you do. I'm not like you are, Imogen, an aerodynamicist, and clearly, Daniel, you know your stuff. But what I did learn when I was at Ricardo for a number of years was that you should never discount anything. You should always, use 2 keywords, which are it depends. So when someone says, can we really have a hydrogen economy? We keep hearing about this. It's like 10 years ago we heard about it, 20 years ago. But I would say it depends. And I also think of that story of, and forgive me for putting it like this, Daniel, but the boy who cried wolf. We've had it a lot with, the dawn of a hydrogen economy that never came, but it's like the boy who cried wolf. That may have been the case many times, but it doesn't mean that it won't happen now for a raft and a range of reasons. And I'm not going to put Imogen in an awkward sort of situation by suggesting this, but it intrigues me that Hyundai have been one of the key investors into Arrival, and of course they are also advocates of both batteries and fuel cells. And so it depends. I think from the little that I know of all of this journey to finding the best solution, it depends. So you've both given us a lovely perspective on that. So I thank you. I thank you both equally for answering all of those questions. Wasn't it nice to get them in person rather than having to read them? I have to say, this was Georgina's idea. I think I'm going to do it all the time now and pretend it was my idea, because I just sort of think it's more like we used to be, I think. So I don't know if you want to have any final words, but we're going to go for lunch. It really is like we're doing it for real. We're actually going to have a lunch break now. So there shouldn't be a queue. You should be able to go straight into the feed area. And we'll be back here at 20 past 1. I know you guys will be busy and doing lots of other things, but yeah, thank you so much for being generous with your time and your intellect today. Do you want to say anything else before we go?
Yeah.
No, just thank you so much for having me, and big thanks to Georgina, like a really amazing job organising today. So thank you very much.
Yeah, she has.
I think I'll do a cheeky closing statement to answer a couple of questions that were pointed towards Imogen. That for developing countries, hydrogen production has now been put into a shipping container, so it can just be plonked wherever you need to and produced there. Israel's even looking at salt water, so potentially doing it on the seaside. And then if you want to invest in HV systems, just go along to our website, www.hv-systems.com, and we'll be happy to hear from you.
There's no harm in doing your own shout out. If you don't do that, it would concern me. So that's good. And we both know who you are, where you are, what you're doing. So yes, that's now going to happen. We hope very well for you both. Thank you very much. If you want to join us this afternoon, you're quite welcome, but I'm sure you've got lots of other things to be busy with. So thank you for your time, and thank you to everybody watching. Please don't go away totally. Come back at 20 past. We've got a whole bunch of fantastic speakers with some really good news hot off the press about what's going on now in terms of grants, activity, mergers, acquisitions. Oh my Lord, it's all happening. So if you want to hear what's happening, join us at 20 past 1. But for now, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.